Thank you so much for this. Thank you so much for the invitation and for being here. It is super exciting for some of you. Some of you know that I've been a student here, so coming back here, it's wonderful. Okay, so I'm not going to give you a usual talk coming from a very clean and straightforward British tradition. My talk is going to be chaotic, but I was told that I could try out some ideas, and you are here to help me out with these ideas. So if you don't mind, I'll just do things that way. I was, as everyone, I was interested in the phenomenon of populism all over the world, in particular in places where we had the impression that they should know better. So, in particular, in young democracies, right? Young democracies, for example, Eastern European democracies like Poland or Hungary, but also young democracies like Israel, are places that they fought. They did some fighting for in order to be able to have a proper state. They should know what the price of freedom is, and yet still they seem to be quite negligent towards the preservation of the democratic institutions and the preservation of the rule of law. So the explanations of populism were, the liberal classical explanations of populism coming from the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, but mostly from the 90s, were the explanations suggesting a slight, immaturity or stupidity of people who were voting for populist leaders. These explanations were not really satisfying, of course, even though they were earnest, probably. And the second wave of explanations, and I did contribute myself to this, to some work on that, were the explanations that insisted on the very particular political and economic consequences of the transformations, of the regime transformations. So the economic consequences were a little bit paradoxical in the sense that normally people lived a little bit better. I mean, the mean level of life was better in those countries. Nevertheless, the inequalities became huge. So the better standards of living were not enough to convince people that democracy that liberal democracy was a great thing. So this economic explanation would be the explanation suggesting that, people were just disappointed from economic point of view, from this liberal democracy. Okay, so this is where we were till quite recently, and there are still quite a number of papers and publications that take this direction. Yet, I don't think that it's entirely satisfying, so this is my frustration, my current frustration. And this is why I'm going to test here the hypothesis that I think is not entirely redundant. The hypothesis of the relevancy of the notion of PTSD in the context of understanding what is going on in these democracies. And there are some problems with the idea of using psychiatric categories to understand political phenomena, but I'm not the first person who's doing this. So in this presentation, I would like to tell you a few words about who was doing this kind of work before, but probably know some of these authors. Then I would like to say a few nice words about the DSM, Diagnostic Manuals of Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, because I think that it's a great piece of work, in particular the last edition. And then I will hopefully say a few words on my two concrete examples of Poland and Israel, who are for me typically the countries who suffer from the PTSD, and for these countries the explanation using PTSD is better than any other explanation I've came across. So, so I'm not going to be super optimistic at the end of the day. Nevertheless, the picture that you see here, it's a super optimistic picture. This is a picture from this summer from Israel, from Tel Aviv, where you had during the last few months before the war, 20% of the whole population manifesting in favor of the rule of law against anti-democratic legal reforms. So this demonstration is rather a sign and a proof that things can go better. Current manifestations are not as big as those, but hopefully there is something nice that is going on. Okay, so yes, the phenomena of populism in general and of things that go with it, well, it's not that surprising. An abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior, as said Viktor Frankl. So yeah, let's try to be as generous as possible to the people and to the subjects I'm going to work on. Well, who is we are here in the field where there are just no experts. There is no way to have an expertise in the domain I'm trying to cover, because psychologists do not have the political theory culture. My culture in psychology is limited to my BA in psychology, which is probably not enough, even if I'm trying to follow as much as possible the contemporary research on the topics. So yeah, we have to take risks, right? And in the context of the explanations of the philosophical explanations of populism, there are very nice things that have been done for the last 20 years in social epistemology. And the work on the cognitive biases was quite decent too, but well, unfortunately, the work on cognitive biases, even though sometimes it's helpful, it only addresses a very superficial side of the studied phenomena. After the Second World War, a little bit before maybe. Okay, no, let's go back maybe to the very beginning of the work on trauma. Apparently, psychology got interested into trauma after the Civil War in the US. So the first works, the first surprises on this topic came from this period and from people who were trying to understand what happened to the soldiers of the Civil War. Of course, the theories were not satisfying at all. Then Freud came to see, for example, in Paris, Charcot, you know this story, and Freud was fascinated with hypnosis, and still hypnosis was not enough to understand the central role of trauma in people's lives. For Freud, the question of trauma was probably the only question in human not always perfect lives, where he does not use the sexual explanation. So it's very interesting to see that he does not think that trauma is related to something sexual. He really thinks that it's neither biological nor sexual. It is related to particular experiences that people tend to have in the context of traumatic objective experiences. So the first big works on the topic came from Freud. I'm not going, of course, to talk about it in details because it's not our topic, and he didn't use the term. But he did use some aspects of his own theory, and since Freudian theory is slightly problematic for many of us, I cannot use it for my own work. It would ask me to make too many concessions for one theory instead of trying to understand the things as they present themselves to me. Okay, after the Second World War, there was a First World War. People did work on the shell shock phenomena among the soldiers coming from the First World War, but again, the theories were not satisfying. Then, yeah, the trauma started to be worked on after the Second World War, and even more after the Vietnam War. It's actually the Vietnam War that gave rise to the very big social movement of veterans who made out of the PTSD, because the name was used at this point, made out of PTSD something that became a genuine social problem shared by a whole generation. And it became a group issue because for them it was a question also of compensation for the incapacity to work after coming back from the war. All right, so this is for the PTSD in general. Then, after the Second World War, in parallel, it's not the same problem at all, but in parallel, many philosophers, many psychologists were trying to understand something very different, namely how come fascism became such an attractive option for so many people. And they started to work on group psychology. So this is also Freud at some point in his group psychology. It was before the Second World War, obviously. You see the date here, 21. Group psychology and the analysis of the ego. This book, as you know, was a response by Freud to a very pessimistic theory of Gustave Le Bon, who thought that people, when they become a mass of people, they become evil and stupid, to say things very simply. And Freud said, no, they are not evil or stupid, they're just they want to love other people, whatever. So there's a libido theory on the group level. We're not going to enter into it's of course not. Again, we would have to accept too many things from Freud to even make sense out of it. So just to then after the Second World War, Solomon Asch, Henry Teifel, Stanley Milgram, all Jewish psychologists were trying to understand how come so many people became massively anti-Semitic and somehow allowed the Second World War phenomena events to happen. So this is the general context. Okay, so let's go back to PTSD. I told you that there might be some doubts about using the very notion coming from psychology to understand political phenomena, because I'm going to try to suggest, or what I'm going to try to study really, is not the notion of PTSD as it was developed to understand what is going on in individual psyche. I claim, and this is something that I test with you, I claim that we are going to be able to better understand the functioning of communities independently of what is going on in the heads of the individual members of these communities, better understanding of the functioning of the communities in terms of their reactions understood through the spectrum of PTSD. And the difference here is that there might be many people who individually do not suffer from any form of PTSD, but collective PTSD, I'm going to define the thing itself, of course, in a moment. Collective PTSD is something that not only gives you a narrative to understand your own history and future reactions, but also creates a feeling of community among people, which means that of course that it's not about individual experience, it's about collective experience and about justification of the reactions, which cannot probably be justified differently. But so a classical objection could be, and I understand why people could react like this, and did indeed react like this when I was already talking about it before, that I'm being condescending towards people who have some political opinions, and I just say that they are ill and they should be treated, and yet they are autonomous human beings and they just want to have their political opinions. Well, the PTSD is a little bit different. It is a disease that is not associated, it has never been associated from its very beginning to any kind of stigma, unlike schizophrenia, or unlike depression, unlike any other thing. So there's no stigma, no fear, no shame, no guilt, because this disease was advocated first by the people, and since this, the first traces of it, as I told you, come from the 1870s from the US. So yeah, the roots of PTSD and some come from the community militancy, and help to diminish the sufferer's own accountability and the responsibility of what is going on with the sufferer. This responsibility is externalized, right? So the intrinsic link of PTSD with some outside event brings issues of responsibility, blame, liability, and secondary gains into particularly sharp focus. And this is why I think that we have to, this condition is very different from any other psychiatric condition. Okay, so I have to explain myself why someone who normally comes as myself from rather Marxian tradition, why I'm using psychology. I'm using psychology for the same reasons as many modern political psychologists do, but we are not that many coming from philosophy. Most of them come from psychology per se. Indeed, we believe that Marx would do exactly the same today. Because Marx was, I'm just quoting, I'm not going to read this quote, I'm just quoting if you would like to know what kind of literature I'm alluding to. So this is a paper by Lawrence and John Jost, who are both working on these issues. So they fundamentally claim that Marx would be doing political psychology today. And moreover, obviously, many elements of Marxian language, even the central notion of alienation, belongs to psychiatry. So this is not something that he would be opposed to. Why I even think that I should underline this issue, because quite often people coming from Marxian tradition would rather say that if there is a social science that we should talk with, it is sociology. And I'm claiming that we have to make out of psychology something that we can still use, and that when I speak in front of my students, I hope it's not recorded. So when I speak in front of my students, I'm just saying that I'm trying to show that psychology can also be left-wing. Okay. So this is the kind of political aim of this story. Okay, so this is just another quotation from these people. Yeah, whatever. I have to go a little bit quicker. I see on my laptop because time is flying unsurprisingly. Okay, there's this notion of maturity that I'm trying to understand. Again, my students hate it because it's a bit condescending, but I think that maturity is a notion that is helpful to understand what's going on in young democracies. I think that in order to be an autonomous being, human being, or state being, or community being, whatever community, so in order to be autonomous, to really be accountable of what you are doing, you have to be mature. And this is not like a super revolutionary thesis, obviously. I mean, this is something that law is recognizing with the very idea of the age of 18. I don't have a criteria of maturity of a country. There might be one criteria. I'm going, okay, I'll just say it right now because maybe I'll not have to have time to go up to this slide. So I think that the criteria of maturity of a country, of a community, is to acknowledge their agency in evil actions, in genocides, in any kind of, unpleasant things or even not genocides, but even smaller things like pogroms, right? So it's not surprising for you that there are some countries who had some troubles in acknowledging that apart from being victims, I'm talking about Poland, apart from being victims, Poland has also been a perpetrator and author of quite a number of pogroms. And this is something that has been deleted from this history. And the maturity comes from the fact that you are able to say, okay, we are sorry for that. So some Polish politicians were able to do that. But as a nation, Poland does have troubles with this notion. So I think that the notion or the criteria of maturity for a country or for a community could be this one, that they, in particular of a community that was traumatized, Poland was traumatized, And no, I'm not even saying, I'm not even mentioning the history of Israel, who is the history of traumatism. But Poland was traumatized, and even though it should be able to acknowledge the problems, and this is where things are. So voila, the criteria of maturity, that is a necessary step for autonomy, because this is where I think that for those of you who have met me in 2006 in this place, you would not expect me to quote Hegel, and I'm going to quote Hegel of all people, right? Maybe not Hegel, maybe just Hegel digested by the Frankfurt School, right? So, Frankfurt School, in particular, our friend Axel Honneth is giving some tools, and this is not Axel Honneth, of course. This is Adorno, and he's just the funniest looking member of the Frankfurt School, obviously. So this is why I'm taking him here. So obviously, Axel Honneth, when he came back to Hegel, when he tried to read Hegel not for what it was and not for what he would like him to be, he indeed opposed the idea of he made it clear, Axel Honneth, why Hegel at some point of the history opposed the idea of autonomy coming from Kant. Of course, we all know that, but I think it's crucial to understand it in the context also of political psychology, or not only in the context of individual moral responsibility that he was genuinely working on. Hegel was working on individual responsibility. So Honneth says that what is missing for to people who are, it's obvious. I'm even embarrassed to say that, but maybe some of you didn't read on it recently. But fundamentally, the story is that a person cannot become an autonomous moral agent unless the person is recognized in the three formative aspects of their life. So the three aspects are love, law, and solidarity. So the personal life, political life in abstract, and social life concretely. So if you don't have some recognition which in these three spheres of life, it is going to be very difficult, if not impossible, for you to become fully autonomous, because autonomy is an end of a process. It's not the starting point, as contrary to what Kant suggested, right? And in this story, the intersubjectivity of relationships is, of course, absolutely crucial. And if it's not surprising for you that we can very easily apply here the idea that some of the, I'm just going to go on with the Polish case. Some of the Polish suffering was not recognized objectively. Poland developed this feeling that they have to repeat the story of their suffering in order to make it clear to the world, etc., etc. Okay, I'm not going to go that much into Hegel. It would take us too far given the time. So let's keep this part. So working on Hegel and trying to understand what happens even in the Frankfurt School, Axel Honneth shows that all the philosophers coming from this tradition were trying to give a name to the pathologies of recognition in a way, to the pathologies of a society which made the society irrational, right? So the society was suffering from the lack of rationality, and each of them were trying to give a name to. For Horkheimer, it was irrational organization of society. For Adorno, it was the administrated world. Marcuse was going to talk about one-dimensional society and repressive tolerance. Habermas is going to use the formula of the colonization of the social life world. And all those notions are trying to grasp precisely this thing that economy alone, or history alone. I'm not able to grasp. So this kind of, relationship between individual, collective psyche and the history and the politics. And this is where I'm trying to, say this is this kind of interdisciplinary field that we are always losers, because of course there's always something that we are missing, but I cannot see what other things we can do to understand what is going on. So from this tradition, you had a number of thinkers, and I will not give detail. I'll not read those slides. If you want, I can just leave you the slides, because I think that the quotes are funny. So Eric Fromm, and then Herbert Marcuse, and then, sorry for the French pronunciation, I know, I don't know what is your pronunciation, and know what is German pronunciation, so I'll go on with the French one. And Frantz Fanon, this one is French. So all those philosophers were trying to apply, in most cases, some of the Freudian areas, either criticizing or distantiating themselves from Freud, or applying Freud as such to this collective psyche. And indeed, they were doing exactly what I think I'm doing, but they were doing this with Freud. And I would like to do something like this, but without theory, with the completely neutral terminology coming from DSM. So these are really for people who might not know this field. Eric's Fromm idea is that very quickly that fascism became a thing for many people, mostly because they were afraid of the freedom that was given to them through the process of laicization, secularization of the world, right? So this is the fundamental idea of Fromm, but still he uses a little bit of Freud, but he thinks that this is related to the history and not to some biological stable setup of each individual. So we have to understand collective and individual psychology in terms of historical elements. And this is something, of course, I can only follow. Whatever. So this is one attempt to do something coming from the early 40s. The second attempt to work on these issues between individual and collective psychology is, of course, the work by Adorno and by other people on authoritarian personality, with this book from 1951, where they are trying to identify what it takes to become a fascist, right? What kind of personal traits of character you have to become a fascist. And well, the book is, the book has this tiny problem that indeed probably it doesn't give enough place to history, and probably it individualizes. It puts the blame on individuals. It exactly makes the mistake that psychology is quite often accused of. So the blame is there is this individualization of blame, and for that reason, I don't think it's very useful today. Among the things that are really useful and that I read very carefully these days, but probably we all do, are the works by Frantz Fanon, who has been forgotten for ages and now comes back triumphantly. Because he makes us able to understand what is going on on the level of collective minds of decolonized people. So I find him extremely helpful to understand what is going on in Eastern Europe. It's just crazy. So my play with students is just, because they don't know his works very well, so I take a quote from Fanon. I just erase everything, erase everything coming from, particularly from Africa. And I just say, instead of empires, I say Soviet Union. Instead of whatever, I said Poland, etc. And it works. And we have a discussion about Polish psyche using a fake quotation from Franz Fanon. And it's awesome. And of course, then I say that it was false, but it's extremely helpful. So this is a friend. Another interesting person from this tradition, it's Herbert Marcuse, of course, in his One-Dimensional Man and in his Eros in Civilization, where precisely he says we are living in the sick society. So I'm not going to use he's really the most Freudian of this whole family of people who deal with these issues. So again, I'm not using his schemas, but still I think that I don't think it's crazy I don't think it's crazy to use these categories. So this is why I'm quoting these people, just to say, listen, it does not come from condescendence. It comes from a genuine lack of understanding of what is going on the level of collective psyche, right? Okay, so let's go to the PTSD as such. Is it even real? So since 1980, the PTSD entered. It entered before, but in the third edition of the DSM. Oh, I thought I had a few words on the. Yeah, I should go with DSM first. Sorry, the order of the slides is not that great. So you all know DSM, but I'll just would like to understand to underline its epistemological position. So the DSM is a manual of, as you see, mental disorders, but it was made with this fundamental idea that psychology is a very divided field from theoretical point of view. Given these divisions that nobody is going to be able to go beyond, we will have to find a way to talk about diseases by only looking at the symptoms statistically, in order to grasp what is going on the surface, because we are not going to be to agree on the etiology on the origins of the disease. So there is this. So at this point of history, where we have the fifth corrected edition of the DSM. Probably it became really good starting with the third edition. This atheoretical approach, purely descriptive, which is adopted at the root in particular of the DSM-3, is not only intended to reconcile clinicians and of different theoretical orientations, it is also the expression of a daring scientific bet, the bet that the psychiatric clinic can be improved, provided that we adopt the methods which have made clinical research successful in other branches of medicine. So in the absence of knowledge of the etiological mechanisms of mental illness, the designers of the DSM-3 rely on a model of validation of clinical entities. It involves a progressively refining, thanks to progress in clinical research, the validity of symptomatological tables by integrating laboratory data, etc., etc. So it's really about just trying to map the problem without trying to explain the origins. All right. So now, what do we know about PTSD? At some point in 2000, before, by the way, 9/11, it was the early 2001. There was a very famous article by Derek Summerfield published in the BMG, and this article said that, well, it's PTSD is only construction. There is no genuine biological reality behind this disease. If there was one, Neolithic people would have post-traumatic stress disorder, right? And they didn't, so it does not exist. So stop this. Stop being so enthusiastic about this condition, which is a pure invention. Society might reflect that the medicalization of life, which has gathered pace in this century, tends to mean that distress is relocated from the social area arena to the clinical arena. Well, this position was, of course, completely destroyed by many responses. But it's interesting to know that this kind of voice was said, was heard, and there are very clear voices against it. So, in particular, Aryeh Shalev from Israel, from the Hebrew University of Israel, said very, very nicely that, well, all these diseases are somehow historical. Depression, psychosis, delirium, all those conditions are related to our conception of our anthropology, our history, our moment of life. So to say that there is historical construction in PTSD is not even false. It's banal, but we knew it from the very beginning. So this kind of criticism is completely out of the question. Yeah, Didier Fassin, Richard Hetman in France did also try to criticize in 2009 the very notion of it, saying that now we all are all traumatized, etc. Again, given the efficiency in the clinic of the PTSD, I think that these positions are just positions of self. No, it's not an interesting way of being sarcastic or being cynical. I think that we have other fields in philosophy where we could be cynical with much more efficiency. Anyway, so we have here this. I give you here a few elements of the definition of PTSD according to the DSM, right? So PTSD is related to the exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury or sexual violence. Polish history, yes. Israeli history, yes. Presence of one or more of the intrusion symptoms associated with the traumatic events beginning after the traumatic events occurred, obviously. Persistent avoidance of stimuli associated with the traumatic events beginning after the traumatic events occurred. Negative alterations in cognition and mood associated with the traumatic events. Marked alterations in arousal and reactivity associated with traumatic events. Okay, this is the criteria. So you needed to be in one of these situations, and of course of course people from young democracies I was just alluding to were in this kind of situation. So I'm not going to comment on this. They've been experiencing traumatic events. This is not subject to discussion. Then, what are the symptoms? What are the intrusion symptoms that I was just mentioning? Recurrent, involuntary, and intrusive distressing memories of the traumatic events. Indeed, the PTSD is related to memory in the first place. Distressing dreams, dissociative reactions, flashbacks, in which the individual feels or acts as if the traumatic event were recurring. So this is something that you see quite often where for example, but this is silly. Sorry, I'm going to use silly arguments coming from the populist rhetoric, but this is how it functions in the public sphere. So the idea that European Union is just another Soviet Union. So this is this feeling that we are all the time in the same situation when we as Poles here in the same situation where someone is trying to do the same things to us. The same kind of reaction we have had in the context of Israel, the comparison to Holocaust of the tragedy of the October 7th last year, where this kind of comparison, the feeling that again someone is trying to destroy the Jewish people. So it is alluding to a genuine tragedy, but in a way that is far from rational, right? Intense and prolonged psychological distress, marked physiological reactions, etc. I'll come to some details of it. Persistent avoidance of stimuli associated with the traumatic events. Okay, avoidance, and this is going to be a bit unpleasant, but I never promised it's going to be a nice talk. Persistent avoidance of stimuli associated with the traumatic events beginning after the traumatic event. Avoidance or efforts to avoid distressing memories, thoughts, and feelings about or closely associated with the traumatic events. Okay, so you're going to tell me, but you just said that it's about remembrance and constant return of the memory. So this looks like the opposite. Maybe it happens on individual level, but it doesn't happen on the state level, right? Well, I claim that it exactly happens on the state level when the states are not able to deal with the very negative memories of what they did, what were the unpleasant things they did. So this is a very particular situation, I think, where we have to think about the fact that victims are not always heroic. Victims are not always very nice, because victims were sometimes also authors of massacres, right? Okay, so this is what. Another, inability to remember important aspects of traumatic events, persistent and exaggerated negative beliefs or expectations about the community or about others, about the world, persistent distorted cognition about the cause of or consequences of the traumatic events. You know, all those elements, if you apply them to the collective psyche of Poland or of Israel, I think that you can find quite a number of common points. Finally, marked alterations in arousal and reactivity associated with the traumatic events, irritable behavior and angry outbursts, reckless or self-destructive behavior. The self-destructive behavior of both countries I'm quoting is quite well known, given quite a number of processes in front of international courts that both countries been subjected to. Hypervigilance, exaggerated startled response, etc. So this is about the criteria and my attempt to put things inside. So so we have this. It's quite interesting. So if you take a look on different countries about the prevalence, but in this case, prevalence of individual PTSD, of course, because collective is not recognized. And I still don't know whether I use it as a straightforward description or as a metaphor. I'm not sure about the status or about it's both at the same time. I don't know. Anyway, so as you see, it's quite present in the US, much less present in the European and Latin American countries. And the country that is famously almost devoid of PTSD is India, where people who suffer from it a little bit are women my age, from my more or less social class. So it's a very unusual audience for PTSD, and not necessarily, by the way, following sexual violences. Somehow it does not provoke PTSD, unlike in the US, where sexual violence typically is associated to the PTSD among women. Yeah, so this is about PTSD in general. Now a few words about Poland and about the trauma, the erased trauma in this country. So indeed, suffering didn't make Poles stronger or wiser, right? Moreover, unlike other countries, Poles ignored their war experiences because they were all heroes, of course, of war, and there were no victims. So instead of doing some work on the consequences of the trauma, Poles decided to be the heroes of the Second World War. And the idea among the social psychologists and psychologists tout court seems to be today, and this is why I'm even quoting this, that the suffering that is transmitted from generation to another, the suffering of the civil population was never acknowledged by the population itself, and of course never healed. And this suffering seems to be one of the causes of this surprising wave of Polish populism that is slightly going down, but it is going down also because of the added generation. I mean, at some point it's going to be erased, hopefully, right? Almost 17% of people in Poland died in the Second World War. Polish citizens, approximately 3 million Jews and 3 million non-Jewish Poles were murdered. So each person in Polish families had someone or several people who did suffer personally. So, and again, this was starting from 1945. The Poles were not dealing with this, but were just constructing the war heroes. So also the frustration arises from the fact that Polish traumas have not been expressed or named. Perhaps, and this is a psychologist I'm quoting here, this is Maja Tulejska, she says that it might sound controversial, but I believe that the enormous support for the Law and Justice Party in 2015 was and still is strongly linked to PTSD, right? Emotions linked to fear, a feeling of helplessness, and also anger. Populist parties appeal to these emotions and offer a simple picture of the world divided into ours, our people, the good, and others, the bad. Yeah, so indeed, I think that Poland, and I'm coming back here to the few ideas from Axel Honneth and from Hegel, Poland does suffer from the pathologies of pathologies of recognition. This explains two things: Polish populism, but also the weird rise of the Polish anti-Semitism during the last, not even the rise, it was always there. Why it didn't disappear? Because they were jealous, right? I think that Poland was jealous about the international recognition of the specificity of Jewish suffering, and the Polish suffering didn't get this recognition. The lesson from this, of course you can say, okay, come on, grow up. Sure, you can say that. But if there is a normative lesson from this application of the notion of PTSD to the level of the community, I think that international politicians and international institutions, and they quite often are, by the way, should be aware of these issues and should talk to these people as if they were not mature. So they should be nicer to them, like saying, okay, we understand what you are saying and we listen to you. You know, have this psychological, this attitude of the psychologist and not an attitude of a partner. And in order to help those countries to go up to maturity. And in the same way, of course, I think that the very same attitude should be adopted and was adopted, for example, by Emmanuel Macron and Joe Biden recently, should be adopted towards Israel. We understand why you react like this, but, you know, please just stop this war or something like this. It should not go with the straightforward condemnation, even if they feel like this, but it should go with the understanding of why a country can react like this. Right? Okay. Yeah, it's. I didn't expect to have a war to give me some elements. So yeah, Poland is indeed immature at this point. I think Israel too. This leads to beliefs in conspiracy theories. I'm not going to quote this in details because I still would like to say something about Israel. But here I'm quoting a study of a gentleman, very nice psychologist from Warsaw, Michał Bilewicz, and he made a very he made a number of wonderful studies about populism and about conspiracy theories. And here he says that people who suffer from PTSD on individual and collective level, because he's one of the people who tries to use it on collective level too, he shows how easy it is for them to adopt conspiracy theories. So this is, you see the idea. I'm not going to enter into this. And because he thinks that these people feel devaluated, they feel victims, they feel powerlessness, all those things that we in a way know, but I think that the framework of the PTSD makes sense out of it. And it makes a better sense than the economic explanation, because again, if you economic explanation should be should provide us with very simple answers. Just give them more money, just give them more equality, it's going to work. No, it's not enough. You have to take into account the whole structure, the whole pathological structure of the PTSD, I think. And here I'm quoting Andrzej Leder. This is the quote I suggested I was going to go to. So I'm closing the Polish chapter. Indeed, the criteria of maturity is the maturity of the institution, of the recognition of the bad things that happened in our history. So France recognized the problems of the Algerian war. The United States, did take some positions towards the civil rights movement. Poland is not yet there, right? Or Germany, of course. Germany is an obvious example. All right, so just a few words. I'm not going to be as long with Israel as I was with Poland. I did much more work on Poland, and it's difficult to make some decent work today with Israel, because I think that this is something that we are going to be able to do in a few months. Yet, look at this. This is something coming from a paper from last month. It's less than a month. This year, in order to have your final exams in high schools in Israel, you are not going to have any exams on Holocaust. It's too much. They cannot. The Ministry of Education decided to suppress the Holocaust from the teaching, because they don't want to expose the kids to this issue today, right, in the context of the current situation. So the depth of what is going on in this country, the fragility of this country, you just cannot not take that into account in any kind of judgment you are doing on the country. But yeah, of course, this fragility and this syndrome that I'm alluding to, PTSD, it makes Israelis, as it made Poles towards the Polish Jews, blind, right? They don't want to know certain things because it's too difficult at that. They don't have the strength to do that. And I'm going to finish with a few slides. I have many more, but I think it's a nice ending. This is a tweet from today by one of the most important lawyers from Israel, Michael Sfard. He is very much engaged. He has always been engaged in the Palestinian struggle for independence, and he is a Polish Jew. He was born from Polish parents in Israel. Okay, so this I'm not going to read everything, but fundamentally what he says is, I don't understand what is going on. There is a trial going on in Hague, as you know. There is this trial, not concerning the genocide, but concerning the legitimacy of the occupation of in the West Bank in particular. So the best lawyers in the world lay out before 15 judges of the court a broad sheet of legal analysis of what is happening in the Israeli occupied districts, and the Israeli press is silent, right? The Israeli press, apart from Haaretz, which he's quoting, the left-wing journal, the Israeli press is silent. And this is his analysis at the end. Israeli society is going through a consistent and deliberate process of stupidity. The factors entrusted with providing information to the public so that it can form a position are promoted in their missions, and all in the service of nationalism, self-glorification, blaming our victims, and accelerated fascism, right? So this is how a left-wing person feels today in Israel, and I think that's the tools I'm kind of providing might be helpful to understand better this kind of situations. Okay, thank you so much.